Hi. I'll move around a little bit so you can see me. And then I'll hide a bit behind here sometimes as well. Well, thanks for coming to hear me talk. So more than a storyteller, I'm a culinary storyteller. So that's a term that I created because I didn't think that I was a culinary designer because it's quite specific. And it's really all about bringing stories to life through food. But before we go into what I'm doing today, I want to tell you a little bit more about... I'm going to just tell you a story, actually. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about this little girl, who is me, and who was grown up around food all her life. So I'm not going to talk about myself in the third person, that's weird. But I grew up around food. I had a French mom, made incredible food every day for me. But here, I'm sure I ate some of that sand. So it started off very early, experimenting with all these different things and seeing what they felt like, I guess. And that's my dog. So I'm not going to tell you about this little girl once upon a time with her dog too much, but my journey in food, I traveled a lot around the world, and like how that's brought me to what I am and who I am today. So I started off here in Cape Town, that's where I was born, and I left when I was 2 to go here in Germany, but it more often looked like this. So that was a huge contrast for us. Moved after a couple of years to this, but sadly it looked a little bit more like this. And then spent 2 years there and went back to that. And then ended up in the City of Lights in Paris, where I did my undergrad. And that looked a lot like this. So this is very strong vitamins, and if you take them after 4, you cannot sleep. And that was pretty much my whole undergrad, because it was a huge amount of work. Every day we had something to hand in, and it destroyed me completely. It gave me a lot of rigor. I know how to deal with a big workload, but a little bit unhealthy. So I decided to pack my bags and move to London after my undergrad when I found this course called Narrative Environments. So Narrative Environments is all about telling stories in space, but it was a demand from the spatial industry, so more for exhibition design, also just reception halls for buildings, but really purely spatial. And I wanted to move away from that because I had done this intensive French system, extremely competitive, 5-6 years in Paris, and it kind of not disgusted me of creating spaces for people, but I didn't want to be stuck in this box, because I always thought that I was outside of the box. So I had this great idea of coming into the course called Narrative Environments, because I wanted to be completely different. So I came in with this idea that I was going to do a restaurant where we were going to, it was going to be a restaurant that made you feel as if you were living at home, but in about 4 to 6 months, I had already designed the restaurant. So I knew how you were going to come in, what you were going to eat in every single room, what you were going to look at, what the painting was on the wall. And so it didn't really challenge me. And I said, I've got a whole year, and this is the last time that I can really take a risk and make mistakes, because I've got school behind me. And why did I leave interior architecture to do exactly the same thing, but now just adding that little element of food to it? And I was so passionate about food that I wanted to give that the center stage and not the space. So I took those walls away, and I had about 5 months left of my degree year to change my project. And I came up with edible stories, but it was a long process. I did, every week I would come back and change. And finally found edible stories and was really happy. So I did a stop and refresh and found this thing where I could live outside of these walls that had been constructed over 6 years. And I was in a peaceful place. But it was also a very long process. But every single day and every single experiment that I did, I learned so much. So rather than, just doing the course and taking it as a degree project, and okay, I've got a year and I need to submit something because I've got an assessment at the end, and that's going to be done, and then I'll move on with real life. I was already living my real life because I had finally found what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So I went out and I called these interior architects, these designers, leaders of companies, people that normally would never pick up the phone to talk to you, and it was like, I'm going to invite you to a dinner, free of charge, 5 people, come and discover a story. And this was a development process, and I wanted them to give me criticism for me to develop the concept. But these people I would never have been able to talk to if I was in France because of the hierarchy in the culinary world, and if you hadn't trained as a chef, there's no chance you're even going to be able to talk to the secretary. So it was just so refreshing to have people give you a chance and take a risk on you. And without them, I wouldn't have been where I was today because I would have just used students to test out the concept, and they were like, yeah, cool, it's good food. But but not much more. And here it was people that were doing immersive theater at massive scale, events like, I'll show you a couple of pictures afterwards. But people who knew what they were talking about, and they're like, you've got this terribly wrong, or this is fun on TV, but it doesn't really work. Don't be gimmicky. Don't use culinary techniques just because they're really cool and everyone's doing them. It has to make sense. Everything that you do in your experience needs to make sense. So I was like, okay, this is really interesting. So how do I figure out what to use when, who wants to try something, who wants to what? And so, it was just, I did about 13 events during those 6 months that I had left for my course, which also built my contact base a huge amount, and a lot of them I can now call close friends. So just before I show you all these beautiful stories that are represented in food, let's just talk about why work with stories. Does anyone know why stories are important? Or, why are stories important? Yes? Memories? Yeah. But why, sorry? Connections. Yeah. So stories have been around for a long time, and it's the best way to create memories, to translate experiences, to pass information on to generations to come, and that's how we are who we are, because memories and past experiences are embedded in us, and it's for us to translate those for generations to come. But it's, so I have like a really nice thing, but it goes from a tribe elder who's going to pass on her experience. It goes from hunters that are going to want to share their what's the word, their, anyways, we'll forget that one. To two brothers Grimms, who were big time inspiration for my degree, because all the stories that I did were Brother Grimm stories. So these two guys, I don't know if you know, but they've traveled around and collected stories and then reinterpreted them and wrote the fairy tales, to an Irishman walking around and telling stories around a Guinness. So, why food? Really? Okay. Oh yeah, that's why it's like, why not food? You know, food is already, it's like, if you're eating good food, it's really delicious. You need it, so it's always going to be around. And yeah, I mean, there's not even a question there. So, okay, so why food and stories? So that's also not something new. You know, as I was saying with the cave paintings, a lot of the drawings had reference to the food because it was, you know, pictures of them hunting and the food that they were collecting, and moments around fires where they might have been eating and there was an elder talking. So all of these stories were also told with food, and it adds a particular element to it because it's a moment in which you feel comfortable and you can really interact with the people that are around you and forget what's outside of those doors and really be in the moment. So, and again, really. But more than that, it's about, for me, edible stories was a discovery of, okay, you've got food, you've got stories, really interesting elements, but if you just concentrate on that, you don't, you know, who's going to eat it? Okay, I can cook a meal for my family, and they'll eat it because they don't really have a choice, but who do I want to, you know, present my edible stories to? So I need to figure out who they are, but more than identifying a user, understanding them. So that's a lot of people watching. And I used to go to cafes and sit in a corner and look at how people would interact with each other. You know, first dates, so interesting. You know, when the person goes to the toilet, you're straight away checking your phone. Like all these little things that people do that you don't realize, but that are so important when you're creating an experience. You know, a girl with her skirt sitting down on those chairs that like make those disgusting marks on your legs. Like that's not cool. What else? The lighting. If you've got this like really beautiful light bulb, but it's so bright that you actually can't see in front of you. All these, I had a first date story of a friend that burnt her hair on a first date when she wanted to go give a kiss to the guy in front of her. Like these things are really important, and you get embarrassed. So you need to think about them, you know, when you're creating a space for people. So I did my little experiments because I did a lot of research in behavioral psychology and how to trigger behavior change through food, but also just creating positive, negative experiences, all of these things, ways that I could trigger people. So I had 5 voluntary guinea pigs, so friends, I didn't tell them what I was going to do to them, come and be in a kind of scientific experiment where I wanted to test out 5 theories that I had read about. Because yes, you can read all these reports and it's obviously been tested by someone else, but for me to really understand how it worked and if I could actually see that behavior change, I wanted to test it out, and I was still studying. So I did 5 different things. I did one where, well, before that, I identified my users and what would make them tick. So I had one girl that was really uncomfortable with her identity. She was Mexican and she didn't like feel Mexican anymore. She had lost that touch with her culture. So I put her in front of her own reflection. So I created a mirror box and I put food in front of her. Well, this is the one. The food itself wasn't so important, but it was more being aware of how you were eating. Oh, sorry. Being aware of how you were eating and being in a confined space. And really she kept on kind of trying to sit straight or kind of go away from the mirror, and became extremely aware of herself, which she wasn't comfortable with. So created a negative experience. This guy had crunchy food. He was listening to someone eating crisps, and he became really aware of how much noise he was actually making while eating. In front of him, there was the same food, but she was listening to classical music. So she was a trained classical ballerina, and so she had a really enjoyable experience, but with the same food. This was my teacher. And I blindfolded him and gave him 3 different ceviches with one different ingredient at each time. And he needed to identify what it was, if it was fish, if it was meat, if it was vegetables. Like, he had absolutely no clue. And he really had to, you know, like, start touching it and smelling it, and became very aware as well of his surroundings, because he didn't have sight. So he, like, picked up on all little conversations. And this kind of brought me to the conclusion that there's this really interesting dynamic between audience and actor, which we don't always realize. So I push my audience to become protagonists of their own experience. So I give them things that they need to interact with so that they become an active member during the dinner, and they add to everyone's experience. But at the same time of being an actor, you're also observing someone else. So everyone is that really interesting thing, and you need to, and that allows people to actually be so in the moment, because they're being, you know, continuously stimulated, that they can't think about what happens outside. They can let go, which is really rare. So understand your user, do a lot of people watching. My local cafe was like, what do you do all day? I was like, work? Sure. Okay. So this brings us to edible stories. Long process, but every day, and even now, every single event, I'm learning something and, like, developing, and I have a challenge, and it's so great to be able to work with the team and overcome those challenges. So I really had to get my hands dirty during these, but it's just so worth it. I started off with events of 5 people, so these are the ones where I didn't charge, didn't make much money, I lost a lot of money, I invited the right people, I built my contact base, and I had a really nice friend that let me use her aunt's garden shed in her garden. So I did a couple events in there, which were amazing, because the audience would tell me that they had completely lost track of time and space. They were in this little, like, overheated wooden garden shed, like in some lost town in London, and they would come out and just kind of look behind them and look in front. It was like, what time is it? Where are we? And that is just, I was like, yes, I'm doing something right. So this was like the aftermath of Hansel and Gretel. At the beginning, I was playing around with how to bring the narrative in, because I hadn't, like, found the final solution to only do it through food. And so I would give parts of the story at certain times, and people would read it. So this is a group of people reading it. These are all culinary designers in London. And then I decided, you know, I'm not going to give them that much text, because actually, you know, you're creating this really interesting narrative bubble, and then you're making them, like, concentrate on all this information. So I decided to accompany, have dishes where there would just be, like, one line of text. And sometimes it was taken from the story directly. So, for example, in Hansel and Gretel, they have no bread left, because Hansel used it to put the crumbs on the path. And so all that's left is 2 or 3 berries, which they picked off the trees. So I created reverse verified berries at the beginning. I was playing with these techniques. And the text was left with only 2 or 3 berries. So just little things that maybe you might have remembered from the story. So just to tap into your memory. So another example of Hansel and Gretel was the witch asked Hansel to stick his finger out every day to see if he's got fat because she wants to eat him. So this one was like stick out. It was something like stick out your finger or something like that. And so the waiter would come out with this massive branch with all these, they were rose-flavored Turkish delights with rose-flavored, like Persian cotton candy that looked like cobwebs, and the rose was because of the rosy cheeks from the kids, and he was always sticking out a bone, so that kind of was a branch, but it kind of worked. And so it was all these things that really to get that food, the audience has to be like, okay, so normally in a restaurant I would have a knife and a fork and I would be served my food in front of me, and but that's not good. You're not stimulated. So here the guests had to let go and like go in the middle of the table and pick these things off. They would also sometimes have this. So this is Felix Barrett, who runs Punch Drunk in London. I don't know if anyone's heard of it, but it's a massive immersive theater production. And he came to one of my dinners, and he's, well, I think he's probably the one person that would get so into stuff. But he was like sniffing this glass, and that was a dessert. So at the end of Hansel and Gretel, Gretel sticks the witch in the oven and she burns, and it was a blood orange sponge cake covered in lavender smoke, and when you would open it, it would evaporate because the witch had evaporated. And the witch, I don't have the picture, but the witch got a burning blood orange sponge cake that she had to then cover. So that's her fatal death, because everyone was given a little bit of an acting role at the story. So reality check, because at this time I was cooking, I was doing set design, I was finding the guests, I was finding the venue, I was transporting everything, I was losing a lot of money, and I was like, okay, this is not sustainable. And I went to New York. So that dinner that I just showed you, I was invited to New York to become a fellow of the Future of Storytelling. And it just I was like, yes, this is amazing. What I'm doing interests more than just these 5 people that I'm going to go get. So I want to allow more people to come to my dinners. But I can't cook for 40 people. So I went to the Westminster Kingsway and I pitched to the students to ask them if they wanted kind of like an internship with me. So I would pay them minimum wage. And the waiters that wanted to be part of it, I would pay for their transport. And I was able to open up to 40 people. These guys were all under 18. I'm 26, so it was a bit hard to manage. But it was a fun experience, and they learned a lot. And which was really nice was that I gave them this playing ground where usually where they would get internships is cutting potatoes or doing the dishes, and here they could really let their creativity boil. And so my pitch was, I gave them the breakdown of Adam and Eve, and I told them if you had no technical constraints, go wild. Like, do this menu. I had broken it up into different parts as I do, and I was like, create a menu for me and go crazy. And then I selected the best 5, and then we brought it back to reality and created the menu. So one of the dishes was frog legs, which was when the creeping creatures came out of the sea onto the land in Adam and Eve. So this was the dish. We also discovered dry ice. So that was when the sorry, I'm not that familiar with the clouds and the sky and the land separated, and so we did some fun element with that. So that was great. They were really into it, and like excited to work and everything. But as I said, it started to get a little bit challenging because they had to balance between, maybe a side job, my thing, and schoolwork. And they couldn't really give as much time as we needed. So I decided to move to the next stage of Edible Stories, which was inviting culinary designers to collaborate with me and create menus. So again, this was a little bit like my beginnings, where one, your contact base becomes bigger. You can start to collaborate with really cool people, and just like the brain fluids are bubbling, and everyone's having a really good time, and you create a really interesting working environment. So I've worked with a company called Pure Indulgence in London, the catering company, and we did Romeo and Juliet. We created a Montague table and a Capulet table, and we asked people to wear masks. So I was saying before, I tried to get people really involved in the stories, and I would assign roles, like specific character roles to them. But when scaling up, a little bit complicated to find stories where there are that many actors, or people would be replicated, and I was like, ugh. So I decided to give them a little bit of a clue when buying their ticket. So this one, I asked them to buy a mask, which was at the beginning of Romeo and Juliet. There's that extravagant ball where Leonardo DiCaprio comes. And so people, like all these people were wearing masks around the table. Some took them off afterwards because they were like, it's a bit weird to eat and wear a mask, and like I can't see what, like if you're looking at me or if you're looking there. But they liked the fun of like everyone turning up in a mask and like discovering each other. So that was my like get help, which was really important. But still at that time, I was doing all the set design and transporting, and so I finally found a solution for the chefs. There's still a lot of work on my end, and my apartment was starting to fill up with a lot of stuff. So I had a friend that was in theater, and she had these amazing set designers, which were students, and all they wanted was pictures for their portfolios. So I was like, please put me in touch. And we ended up being able to sell tickets so that I could pay them, which was great, because they are so resourceful. And then we went on to doing Alice in Wonderland. That's me. Again, in the same venue, which was a really cool venue where it was on top, like you arrived at the top of the bridge and you kind of went down the rabbit hole into an arch. So this was the inside decor, where we just were extremely resourceful in finding all these free bits and bobs. Attention to detail, allowing your audience to really kind of get into that, the micro scale and concentrate. Like every table had a different theme. So we had the mushrooms, we had the croquet, we had the dancing around the sand tower thing, and Alice at the beginning when she's reading her book on the tree. So that's that one. Or being read the story by her dad. This one we worked with a company called Blanche and Shock, who are culinary designers in London. They worked at Noma before, so their food is very experimental, with all these weird ingredients that no one knows what they are, and no one knows where they got them, but really fun to work with, and also just for me, a culinary discovery of like flavors that would go together, and just the amount of detail of every single ingredient in the dish. And that was kind of the teaching that the chef had at Noma, which was just concentrate and really respect every single ingredient and try to push it that much further. So this was, I don't know if you remember in Alice in Wonderland, she has these like 2 mushrooms and she has to eat like them really carefully, because otherwise she grows too much or she comes too short, and she has to like balance it properly. So these small, there's small mushrooms, there's a big mushroom, there's a small egg, and there's a big egg. And we also did the rose. So again, the Red Queen wants everything red, and the roses were delivered white. So those men in cards, they had to paint all the roses red, and so we had edible rose petals in a meringue, and with a little bottle which said "Spill me," and they had to spill it on the roses. and eat them. So try a new angle. Recently, so these are all public events. They're all fairy tales or stories that we grew up with that we would have come across at some point in our past. And I was approached by an author to do a book launch. So I was like, okay, sounds really interesting, but people are not going to know what we're talking about or what we're trying to represent. And so we just tried a different kind of approach to the whole concept, which was her coming out. So we had broken up her new book, and she would read 2 sentences of the story, and then we would bring out the dish that corresponded to it. And people really got into the dishes. So this is her, Sarah Holt, debut author, Love and Eskimo Snow. So it worked really well. People really, really got into the dishes and tried to understand them and base it on the menu and come back. And what's great about this concept is that when people are going to buy the book, in which she actually sold out the stock that she had brought, they're going to relive it, but live it in a completely different way because they would have got a taste, like literally a taste, of the story. So that was a really fun project to work with. Huge constraints. Liz worked on this one with me. So the one that I'm doing, this is a student. You probably have seen her around. So I don't know if there's a pointer thing on here. Yeah. So here, behind these like chalkboards, we had set up these trestle tables, which ended up going like this because we didn't really have that much budget, and we wanted to really give out amazing food. So that was we'd spend a little bit less money on the tables, and we got to throw them away at the end of the event, which was great. But yeah, no running water. We had wind coming in because it was like an open space, random people just walking around. And so, you post-rationalize it that it's an experience and like it's kind of like live theater and people can watch it and understand. Anyways, it was complicated. The author loved it. She assigned an autograph saying, "You made all my dreams come true for this book." So that was just like, you're like, wow, I worked for the individual, and it worked, and she loved it. So that's great. And we got people to live tweet the event, which was nice as well. So they got even more interested in it. And that is yes, I've done something right when people start to interact with each other and sometimes even go for drinks after the event, even though they wouldn't have known each other before. One of the dishes was a 3-way oyster, which represented 3 ways of love. So basically it's a story of this girl that has a car crash, and she writes a journal. So she passes away, but she writes a journal, and you discover these 3 different characters, and the first time that they fall in love. And so we represented that with the oyster, with the aphrodisiac and stuff. And this was the dessert, which some of the flavors I recreated yesterday during the workshop. But it was the discovery at the end that all these 3 characters were actually her, and 3 ways that she had loved 3 different men at the same time. And so it was just a combination of everything like on one plate. What's next? What isn't? There's so much that Edible Stories has allowed me to do. So, maybe this new stream of doing book launches is great. You have a lot of corporate work is slightly different because you're working on a brand story or you're working on a theme. We've recently done a project on trust where we had to work with the senses and enhance trust through the senses and get people to walk through different spaces. And then there's a new concept, which is a little bit in my head at the moment, to recreate the luminaires, like when they were in the salons and they were discussing about contemporary topics, and getting, head of philosophy to come and host one of those and really have amazing foods and amazing wines, and subliminally get people to talk about things and maybe even create action. I don't know. So yeah, but this is what it's all about. It's me in the middle, and this is at the workshop yesterday, but it's just being able to work with incredible people every day. And, you know, I'm not teaching anyone anything. Like, I'm doing what I love to do, and that's, like, I'm happy that I'm able to do that. But I wouldn't be where I am without everyone that's been supportive. So I look forward to doing that a lot more. And then there's just a couple pictures from our workshop yesterday. So we had, I don't know, a couple of you in here were at the workshop, but I had asked people to submit one of their childhood or memories that were close to them. And I selected 3 because there were 17 submissions and we only had 2 hours. So we created 3 and translated 1 as a starter, 1 as a main, and 1 as a dessert. And broke people up into groups of 5. And there was a bit of a competition between starters and mains. And as soon as I said, I introduced the workshop and everyone was like, yeah, that's really nice. As soon as I said competition, it changed. So, you know, but yeah, the results were like, it's just so nice to see that. I don't know how many people were actually, you know, trained as chefs, but you could just see that, like, with today, you know, you have so much more access to all these techniques that are happening that really good chefs are working with in restaurants, but you can do them in your own kitchen. Like, you can go in MSK and order all these, like, fun things and, like, play around, and, you know, it's great, and it just translated really well in the workshop. Like, some of the stuff that came, I was like, how did you come up with that? It's amazing. Yes, go for it. So these are just some beautiful pictures that we created. And I asked them to not only think about the food and the plates, obviously, but think about how would you serve this to your audience, and how are you going to translate just through the food and without telling them the story. How are you going to, you know, what's the action that your audience, or your guest, is going to have to do with the food and to recreate that story. So this was an example where it was a story about a girl that had this, I still haven't figured out exactly what it would look like, but it's like a synthetic bathrobe, which is red. And she was cooking pancakes in the morning. Her parents were in the garden, all calm and everything. And anyways, the synthetic bathrobe lit on fire, and she was in distress, and then she was banging on the windows, and her parents didn't really care. And so we represented that in all these different ways. And this one is this calm garden, which then got added to, like, burning alcohol, and, like, went on fire, and then it's just, like, yeah, it was fun. This is another representation of that same dish. Thought I had a couple extras, but yeah, I had a question the other day of, is this a trend? Is this something, you know, stories and food and, like, getting people to be active in their experience, you know, does it have a lifespan? And with Edible Stories, what I try to do is know my user. So I know that there might be some guests that they've had a really long day, and yes, they spoiled themselves and they've bought this dinner, but they don't really want to do anything. They just want to have a really good meal. And yes, be in a nice space, but just go for dinner. And you can do that. Like, I don't force you. My waiters don't go and, like, go touch the table. You know, you're allowed to have a nice meal, but if you start to feel a little bit more comfortable, maybe with a couple of glasses of wine, you're allowed to go talk to these other, you know, these strangers that might become great friends. And, you know, allowing people to, everyone's different. There's people that are going to engage straight away. There's people that's going to take them a bit of time. But creating this, like, this narrative bubble in which it's just you, and we're going to let you do what you want, and, you know, let loose. Well, not completely, but, you know, within boundaries. But, you know, have a good time. Let go. Live the moment. Create new memories. And maybe make new friends. So, yeah, I don't think it's a trend. I think that it's something that is important, and we need to get back to that. You know, we're so much behind screens all the time and checking on what, you know, I've been on Instagram quite a lot since I've been here, as you might have seen, but it's, you know, yes, it's important to be able to be in touch with people across the world, but you need to also be in touch with people that are in the room around you, and create those special moments. So I'm just going to leave you with a piece of like this inspirational quote that has done a lot for me. You know, you grow up with people around you that measure success in a certain way, and there's that, and then there's your dream, and there's happiness, and there's, you know, my happiness is other people's happiness. It's not about me. Like out of both stories, yes, it's my concept, but it's not about me. It's about the moments that I can create for people. And I want to keep doing that, and whatever anyone says, even though maybe public events are not the ones that are going to make that much money, but I don't care, because I'm going to continue doing them because I have fun doing them, and the moments I create are special. So I'll sell out for some corporate stuff to get money, but but I'll leave you with this, and thank you.